There is no denying that the Pimax Crystal Super is an absolute beast of a VR headset, boasting a ridiculously high resolution and wide field of view. However, its price and a few other quirks mean it may not be the perfect sim racing VR headset for everyone. This is a headset with incredible specs when you look at them in isolation, with a pretty eye-watering price tag to boot. But the question is whether it truly delivers for us sim racers who want to feel completely immersed in the cockpit or the driver's seat. After spending countless hours racing everything from F1 25 to iRacing with this thing strapped to my face, I want to share my thoughts and review of the Crystal Super. I'm going to share my experience with this premium VR headset from a sim racing perspective. To answer that very question, is this the best sim racing VR headset? At a glance, the Pimax Crystal Super is Pimax's flagship VR headset. It sits above the Crystal Lite and the much smaller Dream Air in terms of price and performance. And it's basically been designed for serious PC VR enthusiasts who demand the absolute best. You'd probably guess that with a price tag of over £1,300 or $1,700, this thing isn't designed to be as casual as, say, the Meta Quest 3. It's an extremely high-end piece of kit aimed squarely at sim racers and flight sim enthusiasts. The specs are pretty crazy. Each QLED panel inside the headset boasts an insane 3840 by 3840 resolution per eye, resulting in over 29 million pixels across a wide 140-degree field of view. It is worth noting that the Crystal Super does ship in a few versions, which can make purchasing a little bit confusing. The primary difference is the PPD, or the pixels per degree, and the field of view. You can opt for an ultra-wide model, which is the one I'm reviewing here, with a field of view of 140 degrees. Then there's a 50 PPD version with 127 degrees FOV, a 57 PPD version with just 106 degrees field of view, and finally a micro OLED variant which changes out the displays altogether and adds on an additional $400. Like most VR headsets, the Crystal Super ships with controllers, which isn't massively important for VR sim racing, but certainly required for other games. Unlike all of its competitors, it has 4 external cameras for its inside-out tracking, as well as internal eye tracking. You get a 90Hz refresh rate, which is actually a little bit lower than some of its competitors, but given the high GPU requirements to run these two really pixel-dense screens, 90Hz is still impressive. When we look at the cost, you may want to squint a little bit because things are not pretty. At £1,352, $1,735, or €1,588 at the time of this review, this is one premium VR headset. It's not the most expensive headset around, but it's priced way above average for a VR headset. In comparison, we have the likes of the Meta Quest 3 at around £470 or $500. Then there's more premium options, such as the old Vive Pro 2, which is around £650, $700, or the Crystal Lite, which is the Crystal Super's smaller, slightly less flashy sibling, and that's only priced around £650, or say $850. If you do want to look at premium alternatives to the Super, you've got the Big Screen Beyond 2, which starts from just over £1,000 or dollars, or the Super Lite 8K, which is around £1,500 or $1,900. Both of those headsets offer micro OLED displays instead of the QLED found in this Pimax Crystal Super. If the mid £1,000 price tag is off-putting, I'd really strongly recommend looking at the Crystal Lite, as it does share a lot of its DNA with this beefier Super. It doesn't boast quite the same performance specs, but it's over half the price for what is really a very similar core experience. Now, the Crystal Super arrives in a decent sized box with a really nice matte black finish and Spot UV logo. So far, so good. Inside, the quality packaging continues with the nicely designed foam inserts for protection, and opening it up, you'll find the headset nestled prominently in the center, with various accessories scattered into different bags and compartments. Everything you need to get going is included, and it's well packaged. Now, with the Pimax Crystal Super unboxed and on my desk, we can start to talk about its design. This is one large headset, and if you've seen the older Pimax Crystal Lite, things are going to look pretty familiar. Pimax is using a pretty aggressive angular design language, very similar to that Crystal Lite, just a bit bigger. The front of the headset features a glossy black plastic, which is an absolute fingerprint magnet. It has a futuristic light bar across the front, which is fully customizable. The rest of the headset is constructed from more plastic, but this time it's matte black. And as you can see from the video, fingerprints are still an issue across most of the body of this headset. There isn't anything really wrong with these materials, but nothing really reflects its premium price tag. With the Crystal Light looking almost identical really and costing so much less, I would have liked some more premium touches on this Super model. A flash of metal or carbon, or something a little jazzier than matte and gloss plastic. Brands such as Big Screen, Apple and even Shiftall are really showing some imagination and evolution of the VR headset as we know it. I can't help but think that this big box-like approach to VR is now somewhat dated. Even Pimax themselves have the Dream Air, which is a lot more refreshing in its design compared to this Crystal Super. Now I said that the size of this headset is pretty large, and so is its weight. The Super comes in at 966 grams, which is around 150 grams heavier than the Crystal Light. For context on this, the Meta Quest 3 weighs in just over 500 grams, which is not far off half the weight of this Super. You can also feel that weight with the majority of it hanging over the front of your head. Despite this though, the ergonomics and comfort are pretty decent. Pimax has done a good job of making this headset comfortable thanks in part to a well-engineered strap. They've gone with a pretty traditional over-the-head and rear strap configuration. However, everywhere is really well padded with a really soft foam, and at the rear of the headset you get an adjustable dial which you can turn to loosen or tighten the headset. And this makes taking it on and off really easy. I found that due to the weight over the front of the head though, the strap does need to be slightly tighter than ideal to stop it moving, and over time this did lead to slight pressure headaches creeping in. Even with the strap pretty tight, any overly enthusiastic movement will cause this headset to move and shift, as the face cushion just isn't quite secure enough to prevent this movement. It's not too much of a problem when sim racing in a static rig, but adding any motion platform and some big bumps or curb strikes will certainly cause this thing to move about. Under the lenses is a rubber light blocker that sits over your nose, and for me, this worked pretty well to block all of the light from outside the headset. It meant maximum immersion as I wasn't seeing my surroundings creeping into view like I can sometimes when wearing my Quest 3. One area where Pimax have done a good job is the cable routing. Unlike say a Meta Quest 3, the Crystal Super headset does require an always tethered connection. The cable runs directly from the headset down one side and exit off kind of at an angle to the one side but at the rear. While sim racing is pretty good, and I can say that I never actually really noticed the cable there during a session. Saying this though, I did run into an issue that many men do, and that is length. The cable isn't detachable from the headset and only spans for 5 meters. While that does sound like plenty, you have to run that 5-meter cable from the back of the headset into a USB port, display port, and power socket. My primary sim rig is on the opposite side of my studio, so I had to drape the cable across the room for it to reach. This can be avoided with the use of an extension cable, and it's probably not fair to expect a cable longer than 5 meters as standard, but it is something worth noting. Now Pimax have designed the Crystal Super to be pretty modular. Most elements can be swapped out, replaced, or upgraded over time, and I really like this. The entire optical engine can be swapped out, meaning you can even upgrade to the ultra-wide or micro LED if you wanted to. The audio elements can also be swapped out. Now, I have the included DMAS speakers, and these require a bit of disassembly and reassembly to attach, which is a little bit less than ideal, but they do offer significantly improved audio. All of the padding elements as well can be adjusted or replaced, meaning over time if they wear or sort of get dirty, then you just simply buy a new one and reattach it. Overall, this design of the headset is a little bit dated. Brands such as Big Screen are really pushing the boundary of what a VR headset looks and feels like, and I do think these larger style units will become relics very quickly. Now, adjustability is key when it comes to a wearable device. After all, we're going to be wearing this for hours at a time, so if you can't get comfy or say you get too hot, it can make motion sickness so much worse, or your sim racing experience just downright unpleasant. Thankfully, the Crystal Super does offer quite a few adjustment options. First up, the genuinely cool feature of automatic IPD adjustment. The headset uses its eye tracking to automatically detect your IPD and adjust the lenses accordingly. This aims to provide optimal clarity for most users without any manual adjustment required. In practice, it worked pretty well, and I didn't have to make any manual adjustments. But you can jump into Pimax Play's software and play about with those manual adjustment options, which are all done via the app. Now, the Crystal Super uses a pretty traditional over-the-head and rear strap design. Straps are adjustable with Velcro, allowing you to pretty quickly dial in the perfect fit. I found a pretty comfortable spot almost right away with minimal adjustments. And then every time I take the headset on or off, it's just a simple case of rotating the dial until it loosens up. Moving around to the front, the cushion that surrounds the lenses is relatively comfortable. It's a thick enough piece of padded foam and creates an okay light seal. A lot of the weight of the device sits against your forehead and nose, so it may not be overly comfy for everyone, and there's also very little adjustability in this part of the device. One last part of adjustability with the Super comes with the form of the audio. Certain early backers will have the DMAS speakers included, and I think it's also an option to purchase separately. And these are add-ons that simply replace the built-in speakers. They can be ignored completely, but they do add extra sound quality and can be adjusted to be different distances from your ears. Mounting's a bit tricky as there aren't really any instructions on how to mount them, but the improved audio quality is a big step up from the internal speakers, so in my eyes they're well worth of an upgrade. So I've looked at the design, the fit and adjustabilities, and now let's talk about performance, as this is really the basket where Pimax is putting all of its eggs. When everything is dialed in just right, the clarity of the Crystal Super is genuinely stunning. With such a high resolution, the image is pretty damn sharp. The real challenge is dialing in your graphics and ensuring your PC and GPU can actually output at a high enough resolution and frame rate to really make use of this headset. One thing I did notice right away is the brightness and vibrancy. Remember, I'm reviewing the QLED version and not the 8K OLED version, which I'd imagine would be even more impressive. But this QLED panel does have some tricks with local dimming, helping boost that brightness and the contrast. When you jump into the Steam VR dashboard, everything pops immediately, and this is really noticeable in games such as LMU, where the UI uses such a bright colour. When you jump on track, this visual fidelity is really put to good use. A lot of a car's interior is dark in most games, and while this doesn't flex the brightness of the display, it does really allow certain areas to shine. Your rev lights and illuminated dash glow really bright. Sunsets and light flares shine bright through the windscreen. The high resolution also comes into play, allowing you to see fine details across your car's interior. This is often where VR sim racing can lack somewhat behind a traditional monitor. Often the dash or small details in the cockpit get lost, or can be really hard to read, but that is not the case here, with super crispy details throughout. And in titles such as iRacing and ACC, I could read pit boards, braking markers, from a much further distance than I could with any other previous VR headset I've used. The dashboards were always crystal clear, meaning I no longer had to lean forward to check my lap time or delta. Now with the large 140-degree horizontal field of view, there's a pretty decent sweet spot in terms of clarity. This sweet spot is much larger than on other headsets, but does remain a little bit limited. And you can kind of see blurring off to the side, requiring you to turn your head slightly more often than you'd want to. You can notice some distortions as well at the edge of the images, which is commonplace with asymmetric lenses, but this isn't really severe, just enough to force you to move your head around to avoid them. Despite that though, the wide FOV does make a big difference on track. This field of view lets you see cars coming alongside you in your peripheral vision and really opens up your awareness. Now, while the visuals can be incredible on track, there is a big but. The GPU demands for this headset are so high, and even with a limitation of 90 Hz, I often found myself unable to really make full use of it. Now I've got two PCs that I've been using to test this headset. My main sim racing PC, which has an RTX 4080, and this isn't capable of running titles like LMU or F1 25 in full resolution. I also tested using a more powerful RTX 4090, which fared a bit better, but it still required me to lower a fair amount of graphics settings in some titles. Playing about with those settings seems to take up the first hour of most sim racing sessions when you jump into a new game, before you ever get to hit the track. Lowering the native resolution, adjusting the sampling, and deciding which graphics elements you can sacrifice and lower down to medium or even low settings in some situations. I found that with my 4090, running iRacing in medium settings with some set to high would give me a pretty stable 90 FPS, but other titles such as F1 25 did require a few other sacrifices when deciding what to compromise on. Overall though, I always found a sweet spot, and even if some graphics settings were set to low or medium, the game and the immersion was absolutely nuts. Now, one trick the Crystal Super does have up its sleeve to help with the GPU demand is dynamic foveated rendering. This utilizes the built-in eye tracking to kind of detect where you're looking and render that region of your lens or of your image in full resolution, or dropping the resolution of the areas around you which you're not looking at. Now, I had instances when this worked really great and did actually lead to a nice performance boost. However, most of the time, there's just a kind of strange blur on your peripheral vision. It can be off-putting as it appears to be slightly more noticeable than I think it really should be. Now, when it comes to racing, I normally use a 49-inch Samsung G9, and I thought the FOV on that thing was pretty good. The sense of action around you and overall awareness is so much better with this headset in comparison to a monitor. Certain games really lend themselves to VR, while iRacing, ACC and LMU all feel great. F1 25 is where I had the most fun. Now, I'm a huge F1 fan, as you know from this channel, but racing from the cockpit view in F1 25 on a monitor or an ultra-wide monitor specifically does provide a really weird experience. In VR, it is so much more viable and enjoyable. You can look into the apex, judge the distance to cars beside you like never before, and the wide FOV that the Crystal Super offers lets you see the track limits and other cars coming alongside you. The incredible brightness provides a super striking image, especially in F1 25 where the contrast is naturally quite high. And one thing I really appreciated was how the improved visuals actually kind of reduced eye strain. With lower resolution headsets like the Quest 3, I sometimes found myself straining to make out some details. With the Super, everything is just clear. This makes longer races more comfortable from a visual fatigue standpoint. As I mentioned, most of the time I wasn't maxing out the headset at 90 FPS. I often found myself dipping into the 50s or 60s most of the time, and this was with graphics set to medium or high, or sometimes low and ultra in certain situations. Pimax does have its own smart smoothing option available in its app. This kind of works a little bit like Nvidia's frame generation. This kind of somewhat worked, but I did notice a little bit of latency and some weird things going on which you can't actually see from the footage. But in a game like such as F1 25, if I moved my steering left and right really quick, I could see some kind of shimmering or distortion on the wheels or the wheel covers. So I mainly raced with this option disabled. Now, I do want to look at the overall ease of use and the experience navigating everything, as this is a pretty key component of any VR headset, albeit slightly less important when you're sim racing. Now, Pimax Play is the app that ships with this headset. It's free to download and it lets you tweak some settings. The software works okay and you do get a lot of customization, although it's not the cleanest app to navigate, and I'd say it's a definite step down from the likes of the Meta Quest app. When you're in the headset itself, it's small UX actions that should really be simple that were the trickiest to navigate. Setting up a play space went wrong far too often. Moving the floating app around inside the headset could be problematic, with the UI often appearing too far away. Also, the pass-through mode is extremely rudimentary. The picture quality of pass-through is bad at best. Everything is black and white, and the quality is so subpar when compared to most other headsets with this feature. However, it's worth noting that direct competitors, such as the Superlight 8K and Beyond 2, don't have any pass-through mode, so I guess this is technically a win in Pimax's favour. Other than setting up your headset in Pimax Play, you can bypass their app completely by using Steam VR, which, to be honest, is how I launched into games 99% of the time. And OpenXR is also supported. Within the Pimax Play app, you'll be using the two included controllers to navigate, and in practice these work well, although I did notice a fair bit of lag in the movement. I wasn't really too concerned from a sim racing perspective, as after I set up the headset, I barely touched the controllers at all, as I could just control my sim with my mouse or my wheel. So after weeks and weeks of sim racing with the Pimax Crystal Super strapped to my face, what's my overall verdict? Well, there is no doubt that this is one impressive VR headset. The technical specs are incredible and kind of class leading. The resolution can be terrific if you have a GPU to support it. And I do say if as well, because you really need an RTX 4090 or even 5090 to support this thing. The wide field of view lets you see much more of the on-track action, and the foveated rendering is a neat feature when it kind of works properly. In terms of raw immersion while sim racing, I found it really hard to beat this Crystal Super. However, there are some key drawbacks. First up, you've got the high price tag, which doesn't get really reflected in the build quality. You then got to contend with the weight and the size of this thing, which can impact longer race sessions. And finally, the issue of your PC and GPU being able to support such high resolutions. If you can look past these or work past these, you're going to have one of the most immersive sim racing experiences possible. And if you're just looking for the very best in sim racing immersion from your VR headset, well, then this may be the best buy for you. Just ensure you spend your money on getting a very good GPU first.